Close your eyes. You're standing in a narrow street in Jerusalem. It's the 1st century. The sun has barely risen, and the air already feels thick, almost syrupy, a blend of wood smoke, animal dung, and something sour you can't quite place. A donkey pushes past you, its flank streaked with dust and dried sweat. Somewhere nearby, a woman empties a clay pot of last night's waste into the gutter. The liquid hits the stone and splashes your ankle. It's warm. You don't have shoes. You have sandals, open-toed sandals. This is daily life in the year 30 AD, and it's about to get worse. Because here's what nobody tells you about the ancient world. We look at the ruins, the columns, the marble, and we think civilization. We think advanced, and in many ways they were. The Romans built aqueducts that stretched for miles, public bathhouses the size of shopping malls, a sewer system under Rome that still functions today. But all of that engineering, all of that ambition, couldn't fix the one thing that killed more people than any army. They didn't understand germs. They had no concept of bacteria, no antibiotics, not even a basic understanding of how disease actually spread. The average life expectancy across the Roman Empire hovered around 25 to 35 years. To put that in perspective, in the modern United States, it's 77. A Roman citizen was statistically likely to be dead before they'd qualify for a car rental today. And a huge part of that came down to one thing: hygiene that would make your stomach turn. So what did a typical day actually look, smell, and feel like for someone living in Judea or the broader Roman world around 30 AD? What did they use instead of toilet paper? How did they clean their clothes? What happened when they got a toothache? That's what this video is about. And fair warning, some of this is genuinely disgusting. Picture yourself waking up. Not in a bed, not the way you're imagining it. You're lying on a thin mat, maybe stuffed with straw if you're lucky, laid out on a stone or packed dirt floor. If you're a common laborer in Galilee or a tradesman in Jerusalem, your home is a single room, maybe two. The walls are rough limestone, plastered with a mixture of mud and straw. There's no glass in the windows, just openings in the wall, maybe covered with a cloth or a wooden shutter. The air inside is stale. You've been sleeping alongside your family, possibly 3, 4, 5 people in a space roughly the size of a modern bathroom. In winter, the room is cold enough that you can see your breath. In summer, it's an oven. Either way, it smells. Body odor. The oil lamp that burned through the night. The faint tang of the animal's pen just outside, or in some cases sharing the ground floor of your house. You don't shower. There is no shower. There's no running water in your home. If you want water, you walk to the nearest well or cistern, and you carry it back in a clay jar. That jar weighs about 50 pounds when full, roughly the weight of a large checked suitcase at the airport. And you need that water for drinking, cooking, and cleaning. Bathing is an occasional luxury, not a daily habit. So you wake up, you put on your tunic, the same one you wore yesterday and the day before that, and quite possibly for the last several weeks. You splash a handful of water on your face from a basin if you have one. You run your fingers through your hair. That's it. That's the morning routine. Without deodorant, without a toothbrush, without even a mirror to check your face. You step outside into the street and you smell exactly like everyone else around you, which is to say, ripe. And this is normal. Nobody finds this strange. There is no concept of daily bathing as a hygiene practice. The idea that you should wash your entire body every 24 hours wouldn't become widespread for roughly another 1,800 years. Now that doesn't mean people in the 1st century never bathed. They did. But the way they did it and the reasons behind it would completely confuse a modern person. Feel the water on your skin. Step down into a mikveh, one of the ritual immersion pools that archaeologists have found all over ancient Israel. There are over 100 of them clustered around the Temple Mount in Jerusalem alone. These pools weren't built for hygiene, they were built for spiritual purification. Before entering the temple, before handling sacred objects, before participating in a festival like Passover, Jewish law required full-body immersion in living water, water that came from a natural source like a spring or collected rainwater, not water poured from a vessel. The pool is carved into rock or lined with plaster. Stone steps lead down into it. The water is cool, sometimes cold, and often murky. There's no filtration system, no chlorine, nothing separating what washed off the last person from the water you're about to step into. You submerge yourself completely, head and all, and you emerge clean in a spiritual sense. Physically, you might actually be dirtier than when you went in. Hundreds of thousands of pilgrims descended on Jerusalem for major festivals. 100 mikvehs serving that kind of volume. Imagine a public pool at a water park, but with no chemicals, no cleaning crew, and no limit on how many people go through it in a day. The water turned cloudy, warm, and organic with use. Archaeologists have found these mikvehs at Qumran near the Dead Sea, at Magdala in Galilee, in residential neighborhoods throughout the city of David. They were everywhere because Jewish law demanded them everywhere. Outside the Jewish world, the Roman approach to bathing was different but equally alien to a modern person. Walk into a Roman bathhouse, a therme, and you're stepping into something that looks like a modern spa crossed with a community center. The bathhouse at Caracalla in Rome covered 27 acres, roughly the footprint of 20 football fields. It could handle up to 8,000 bathers a day. Even in smaller provincial towns scattered across Judea and Syria, the local bathhouse was the social hub. You'd exercise in the courtyard, move through rooms of increasing heat, the tepidarium with warm, humid air, the caldarium with scalding hot water heated by underground furnaces called hypercausts, and then plunge into the frigidarium, a cold pool designed to shock your system and tighten your pores. The noise alone was incredible. The philosopher Seneca, who lived in an apartment above a bathhouse, left one of the most vivid complaints in all of ancient literature. He described grunting weightlifters, the slap of masseurs' hands on oiled backs, splashing water, vendors shouting about sausages and pastries, and the constant yelping of people having their body hair plucked out. But here's the detail that changes everything. They didn't use soap. The Romans didn't regularly use soap to clean their bodies until well into the later centuries of the empire. Instead, they rubbed olive oil into their skin, worked up a sweat either through exercise or the steam rooms, and then scraped the oil off with a curved metal blade called a strigil. The oil was supposed to trap the dirt and dead skin. When you scraped it off, you scraped the grime with it. Imagine someone handing you a dull metal crescent and telling you to scrape your own skin clean. The sound, metal dragging across oiled flesh, catching on the hair of your arms, your legs, your chest. Wealthy Romans had slaves do this for them. Everyone else managed on their own, sometimes trading the favor with a friend at the baths. And the scrapings, that brownish mixture of oil, sweat, dead skin cells and dirt, was actually collected and sold. Some people believed the body scrapings from a famous athlete had medicinal properties. They rubbed it on sore muscles and joints. And the bathwater itself. In many bathhouses, the water was only changed once a day. Without filtration or chemical treatment, by late afternoon, that water contained the oil, sweat, skin cells, and whatever else had washed off every person who'd been through since morning. Archaeological studies have found that bathing in these pools likely did nothing to reduce the spread of parasites. If anything, the warm communal water may have helped infections move from person to person more efficiently. The Romans built one of the most impressive bathing cultures in human history, and it might have made them sicker. Now for the part you've been dreading. There is no toilet paper. Won't be for another 1,500 years at minimum. The Chinese would develop something resembling it around the 6th century AD. In Europe, it wouldn't become widely available until the 1800s. In 30 AD, it doesn't exist anywhere on Earth. So what do you use? Sit down. You're in a Roman public latrine. These are long stone benches with keyhole-shaped holes cut into them, lined up side by side with no partitions, no doors, no walls between you and the person next to you. Your bare thigh is touching the bare thigh of a stranger. This is not a private experience. Romans chatted, argued, cracked jokes, and conducted business deals while sitting on the latrine together. Some of these facilities could seat 20 or more people at once. Think of it as a very unfortunate conference room. Beneath the seats, a channel of running water carries waste away into the sewer system. At your feet, there's a shallow gutter with a slow trickle of water running through it. And sitting in that gutter, or in a bucket of vinegar nearby, is a sea sponge attached to a wooden stick. The Romans called it a tersorium, sometimes also a xylospongium. That sponge on a stick is your toilet paper. You pick it up, you use it, you rinse it in the gutter water or dip it into the vinegar bucket, and then you set it back down for the next person. That's right, it's communal. The entire latrine shares the same sponge sticks, maybe 2 or 3 of them, for 20 people, rotating through all day long. The sponge was soft and absorbent, harvested from the Mediterranean Sea, and by itself it was actually a reasonable cleaning tool. The vinegar and salt water were supposed to disinfect it between uses. Whether they actually did is a question that answers itself when you consider that dysentery, typhoid, and intestinal parasites were rampant across the Roman world. Modern microbiologists have pointed out that a vinegar rinse would do almost nothing against the bacteria being transferred from person to person on a shared sponge stick. One account from the philosopher Seneca describes a Germanic gladiator who killed himself by shoving a tersorium down his own throat in the latrine rather than face the arena. That's how accessible these things were, just sitting there in a bucket, at arm's reach. Even a prisoner could get his hands on one, and that's the Roman version, the advanced version. In rural Judea, in a small village like Nazareth, where the population was maybe 400 people, roughly the size of a single apartment building in a modern city, the situation was more basic. There was no sewer system, no communal latrine with running water. You walked to the edge of the village, found a spot, dug a shallow hole with a stick or a small tool, and used what was available: leaves, stones, pottery shards called pessoi, broken pieces of ceramic that archaeologists have found with fecal residue still on them, or your left hand, washed afterward in whatever water you could find. The Book of Deuteronomy actually includes specific instructions about this. Carry a digging tool. Go outside the camp, dig a hole, cover what you leave behind. This was progressive for its time. Most ancient Near Eastern cultures didn't even have that much structure around waste disposal. But even with those rules, even with the discipline of burying waste, intestinal parasites thrived. Archaeological studies of ancient latrines and cesspits from the Roman period, including sites in Israel, have found eggs from roundworm, whipworm, tapeworm, and pinworm in nearly every sample tested. These parasites were so common that researchers believe the majority of the population was infected at any given time. You weren't unlucky if you had worms. You were unusual if you didn't. Take a breath. Actually, maybe don't, because we're about to talk about how they washed their clothes. You're walking through a street in a Roman city. You pass a building with large stone basins lined up out front, and the smell hits you before you even reach the doorway. It's sharp, acrid, and eye-watering. This is a phulonica, the Roman equivalent of a dry cleaner. And those stone vats are filled with human urine. The fullers, the workers who operated these laundries, collected urine from public urinals and sometimes placed collection jars outside their shops for passers-by to contribute. Emperor Vespasian, who ruled from 69 to 79 AD, actually taxed the urine trade. When his son Titus complained that the tax was beneath the dignity of the empire, Vespasian held up a gold coin and asked his son if it smelled. When Titus said no, Vespasian replied with what became one of the most famous lines in Roman history. And yet it comes from urine. That phrase, pecunia non olet, money doesn't smell, is still used in Italian and several other languages today. The chemistry behind it was actually sound, even if the Romans didn't understand it in those terms. When human urine sits and decomposes in the heat, it produces ammonia. Ammonia is a genuinely effective cleaning agent. It breaks down grease, dissolves oils, and strips lanolin from raw wool. The fullers would pour aged, stale urine into their stone vats, drop in the dirty garments, and then workers, usually slaves, would climb barefoot into the tubs and stomp the clothes with their feet for hours. up and down, soaking their skin to the knees in decomposing urine, while the ammonia worked into the fabric and loosened the dirt. After the urine bath, the garments were pulled out, rinsed in clean water, and sometimes treated with a special absorbent clay called fuller's earth to soak up remaining impurities. For the whitest garments, like the toga that was the mark of a Roman citizen, the cloth would be draped over a wicker frame and bleached with sulfur fumes. The entire process could take days. The cost of professional fulling was significant. Most common people didn't use it regularly or at all. Your average laborer or farmer simply wore their garments until they fell apart, washing them occasionally in a river or stream when the opportunity arose. Maybe every few weeks, maybe less. And wool, the most common fabric in the Roman world, absorbs odor like nothing else. By modern standards, the smell of a crowded market in 1st century Jerusalem would be overwhelming. A dense, unbroken wave of body odor, animal waste, cooking smoke, rotting food scraps, and the sharp tang of sweat-soaked wool slowly drying in the sun. Open your mouth. Actually, picture opening the mouth of someone living in the 1st century and try not to wince. There are no toothbrushes. The bristle toothbrush wouldn't be invented until China in the 1400s and wouldn't reach Europe until the 1600s. In 30 AD, your options for dental care are limited, creative, and occasionally horrifying. The Romans cleaned their teeth with powdered mixtures. Recipes varied wildly, but common ingredients included crushed bone, oyster shells, pumice stone, charcoal, and baking soda. These were ground into a paste and rubbed onto the teeth with a finger or a scrap of linen cloth. Some of these mixtures were so abrasive that they actually wore down the enamel over time, creating the very problems they were trying to prevent. Imagine sanding your teeth with a gritty paste every morning and calling it dental care. And then there was the urine. The Roman poet Catullus mocked a man named Ignatius for having suspiciously white teeth, implying that he rinsed his mouth with urine. Imported urine from the Celtiberian people of the Iberian Peninsula, what is now Spain, was considered the strongest and most effective for whitening. The ammonia content did act as a bleaching agent and probably killed some oral bacteria. It worked. But the experience of swishing aged imported urine around your mouth first thing in the morning is the kind of image that stays with you. For the average person in Judea, dental care was even more basic. You might chew on a fibrous twig from an arak or olive tree, using the frayed fibers as a primitive brush. You might rinse with water mixed with herbs like mint or thyme, or you might do nothing at all and simply live with whatever your teeth decided to become. When things went wrong, when a tooth cracked or an abscess formed and the swelling pushed up through the gum like a hot marble under the skin, the pain was extraordinary and the solutions were medieval. The Roman physician Celsus, writing right around 30 AD, recommended treating a toothache by eliminating wine and hard foods, then applying a hot sponge soaked in oil to the jaw. If the pain continued, a mixture of wax and oil was pressed onto the cheek and wrapped in wool. If that failed, the tooth was pulled by a barber, with iron forceps, without anesthesia, without sterile instruments, without antibiotics to prevent the infection that so often followed. Tooth abscesses that went untreated or were improperly extracted could lead to septicemia, a bloodstream infection that killed quickly and mercilessly in a world without antibiotics. Something as simple as a cracked molar, something a modern dentist could fix in 30 minutes, could end your life within a week. False teeth existed, carved from ivory, animal bone, or paste, and wired to the remaining natural teeth with gold thread. They were expensive, fragile, cosmetic rather than functional, and available only to the wealthy. For everyone else, a missing tooth was just a missing tooth, and by the age of 40, if you made it to 40, most people were missing several. Smell the smoke. You're standing next to a cooking fire in a courtyard in Galilee, and a woman is preparing the evening meal. Bread baked on a clay oven called a tabun, heated by burning dried animal dung as fuel. The bread has a faint smoky flavor and a gritty texture from the stone ground flour, which always contained tiny fragments of the millstone itself. Those stone particles, found in nearly every sample of ancient bread ever analyzed, wore teeth down to stumps over a lifetime. The dental wear patterns found in 1st century skulls are consistent with decades of eating heavily grit-contaminated flour. The main dish might be a lentil stew or a vegetable porridge with onions, garlic, and whatever herbs were growing nearby. Meat was rare for common people, reserved mostly for festivals and sacrificial occasions. Fish was more accessible, particularly around the Sea of Galilee, and it was preserved by salting and sun-drying because refrigeration simply didn't exist. There was no ice, no cold storage of any kind. Food spoilage was a constant battle you couldn't win. Without refrigeration, meat and fish began to decompose within hours in the Mediterranean heat. Temperatures in Judea during summer regularly exceeded 90 degrees Fahrenheit, about 33 Celsius. Salting, drying, smoking, and pickling in vinegar were the only preservation methods available, and they didn't always work well enough. Contaminated food was a leading cause of the gastrointestinal illnesses that plagued the ancient world year-round. And then there was garum, the fermented fish sauce that the Romans poured on nearly everything. Garum was made by layering fish intestines, blood, and salt in large stone troughs and leaving them uncovered in the sun for weeks, sometimes months, while the mixture liquefied into a pungent amber-colored sauce. The smell of a garum production facility was so overpowering that Roman law required them to be located outside city walls. Modern recreations of garum describe the smell during fermentation as somewhere between a fish market and an open sewer. The finished product was shipped across the empire in sealed clay amphoras and used the way modern Americans use ketchup or soy sauce, on bread, on meat, on vegetables, in marinades, mixed with wine as a drink. But here's the problem. If the fish used in production contained tapeworm larvae and the fermentation process didn't generate enough heat to kill them, those larvae survived intact in the finished sauce. Researchers studying the spread of fish tapeworm across the Roman Empire have found that garum may have been a primary transmission vector, spreading the parasite from production centers along the coast of Spain and North Africa to dinner tables thousands of miles away in Britain, Germany, and the Eastern Mediterranean. You're sitting down to eat with your family. You tear off a piece of gritty bread, dip it in a communal bowl of lentil stew, and everyone eats from the same dish with their hands. The hands that just came from the workshop. The hands that just held the reins of a donkey. The hands that just came back from the latrine. In Jewish tradition, ritual hand-washing before meals was practiced, a pouring of water over the hands from a vessel. But this was a spiritual act, not a scrubbing with soap designed to remove bacteria. Soap, as a hand-cleaning agent, was essentially unknown in the 1st century Mediterranean world. Press your thumb against a thorn. Feel the sharp point break the skin of your palm and watch a tiny bead of blood appear. In the modern world, you rinse it under the tap, maybe stick a bandage on it, and forget about it by tomorrow. In 30 AD, that tiny wound could kill you. Without antibiotics, without antiseptic, without even the understanding that invisible organisms could enter a wound and multiply, infection was a constant companion to daily life. A cut from a tool in the carpenter's workshop, a scrape from a fall on a rocky path, a blister that burst and rubbed raw against a sandal strap. Any of these could become infected, and once infection set in, the options were grim. The 1st century physician Celsus described the signs of infection with remarkable accuracy: redness, swelling, heat, and pain. His 4 cardinal signs of inflammation are still taught in medical schools today, 2,000 years later. But his treatments, while sometimes effective by accident, were a mix of genuine insight and dangerous guesswork. Honey was applied to wounds, and this actually worked. Modern science has confirmed that honey has genuine antibacterial properties, creates a physical barrier against contamination, and promotes tissue healing. Vinegar was used as a wound cleanser, and dilute acetic acid does have mild antiseptic effects. Wine, poured directly into open wounds, provided some degree of disinfection from its alcohol content. These weren't random choices. They were observations accumulated over centuries. People noticed that wounds treated with honey healed better. They didn't know why. They just knew it worked. But alongside these accidental successes came the disasters. Some practitioners applied poultices of animal dung to wounds, introducing tetanus and other soil-borne bacteria directly into broken skin. Bloodletting, the practice of deliberately cutting a patient and draining blood to rebalance the four humors, weakened already sick patients and accelerated their decline. Cauterization, pressing a red-hot iron against a wound to seal it shut, prevented bleeding but destroyed surrounding tissue and created a massive burn on top of the original injury. Surgery existed, and some of it was genuinely impressive. Roman military surgeons could amputate limbs, remove cataracts, drain deep abscesses, and set broken bones with a level of skill that wouldn't be matched again in Europe for well over 1,000 years. Their bronze and iron surgical instruments, forceps, scalpels, retractors, bone saws, and probes have been excavated at sites across the empire and are sometimes nearly identical in design to their modern equivalents. But none of these instruments were sterilized. They might be rinsed in water or wine between patients. Maybe. The concept that surgical tools needed to be boiled or heated to destroy invisible contaminants wouldn't arrive until Joseph Lister's work in the 1860s. A surgeon in 30 AD might perform a brilliant, life-saving amputation and then watch helplessly as that same patient died 2 weeks later from an infection introduced by the very instruments that saved him. Run your hand across your scalp. In the 1st century, what you'd feel depends on your social class and where you live. But one thing was universal across the entire ancient world, regardless of wealth, status, or geography: lice. Delousing combs have been found at archaeological sites across the Roman Empire, from Britain to Israel to North Africa. These fine-toothed combs, some made of bone and some of wood, were designed to strip lice and their eggs from hair, strand by strand. They were used constantly. Lice were not a sign of poverty or neglect. They were a fact of daily life, as unavoidable as dust or sunburn. The average person in 30 AD spent part of their daily grooming routine having someone pick through their hair. A mother checking her child's head, a wife checking her husband's, friends grooming each other in the bathhouse courtyard. This was as routine and unremarkable as brushing your hair is today. Head lice fed on blood from the scalp and cemented their eggs to individual hair strands. Body lice lived in the seams of clothing and emerged to feed, leaving red, itchy welts across the torso. Pubic lice occupied their own territory. All 3 species were endemic to the 1st century population. If you wore the same unwashed garment for weeks, which nearly everyone did, body lice were virtually guaranteed. And body lice didn't just itch, they carried epidemic typhus, a disease that could tear through a densely packed city and kill thousands in weeks. Beyond lice, bed bugs infested sleeping mats and the crevices of mud brick walls. Fleas jumped from the animals that shared your living space to your skin and back. The ancient world was a world of constant low-level infestation that modern people in developed countries have almost entirely eliminated and can barely imagine experiencing. For women in the 1st century, every hygiene challenge facing men was multiplied and compounded. Menstruation was managed with whatever absorbent material was available. Rags, strips of wool, linen cloth, or plant fibers were folded and held in place with a belt or cloth girdle. There were no adhesives, no elastic, no disposable products, no sanitary disposal systems. The cloths were washed by hand and reused month after month, year after year. In Jewish law, a menstruating woman was considered ritually impure for 7 days, followed by immersion in a mikveh. During those days, physical contact with her rendered others ritually impure as well. This had real social consequences in a community organized around temple worship and communal meals. Childbirth was the most dangerous event in a woman's life. Without antiseptic technique, without understanding of bacterial infection, without cesarean sections that the mother could survive, childbirth killed roughly 1 in every 30 to 50 women per delivery. The cumulative risk was staggering. A woman who went through 6 or 7 pregnancies, which was common in a world without reliable birth control, faced a 12 to 20% lifetime chance of dying from the process. That's roughly the same odds as drawing a face card from a shuffled deck of cards. The midwife attending the birth might wash her hands beforehand, or she might not. There was no protocol, no standard of care. The tools were basic: a birthing stool or chair, cloths for catching and swaddling the newborn, olive oil as a lubricant, a blade or sharp stone to cut the umbilical cord. If complications arose, a breech baby, uncontrolled hemorrhaging, a fever that set in days after delivery and spread like fire through the new mother's bloodstream, the options were herbal remedies, prayer and hope. And often, none of those were enough. Newborns were rubbed with salt and olive oil, then wrapped tightly in swaddling cloth. The prophet Ezekiel references this tradition directly. Infant mortality was so catastrophic, roughly half of all children dying before age 10, that many cultures in the ancient world didn't formally name a baby until days after the birth. The Romans typically waited 8 or 9 days, not out of coldness, out of experience. Too many newborns didn't survive that first week. Step outside one more time. Walk through the streets of a first-century city and brace your senses. The streets are narrow, in many districts barely wide enough for 2 people to pass without turning sideways. Buildings rise up 3 and 4 stories, cutting off sunlight and trapping heat, moisture and smell in the spaces between. The road surface is packed earth in smaller towns, rough cobblestone in wealthier districts. Drainage is non-existent in most residential areas. When it rains, the streets become rivers of slurry, rainwater mixed with animal waste, rotting food, and whatever else has accumulated since the last downpour. In Rome, chamber pots were routinely emptied from upper-story windows directly into the street below. Roman law technically prohibited this after certain hours, but enforcement was a joke. The satirist Juvenal wrote about the dangers of walking through Rome at night and specifically warned about the very real possibility of having the contents of a chamber pot land on your head from an open window above. He suggested making your will before going out for an evening stroll. Animal waste was everywhere. Donkeys, oxen, horses, goats, sheep, chickens, geese, and stray dogs shared the streets with the human population. In Jerusalem, this intensified dramatically during major festivals. Before Passover, tens of thousands of lambs were driven through the narrow streets toward the temple for sacrifice. The first-century Jewish historian Josephus estimated that 256,000 lambs were slaughtered during one particular Passover celebration. Even if that number is exaggerated by a factor of 10, 25,000 animals being moved through a walled city smaller than modern Central Park represents an extraordinary amount of waste, noise, and chaos. The temple complex itself, where the sacrifices took place, had stone channels built into the altar area to drain blood and rinse the killing floor with water. The blood of tens of thousands of animals mixed with water and flowed through these channels out of the temple precinct. It had to go somewhere. In a city built on a hilltop, it flowed downhill through whatever drainage existed toward the Kidron Valley below. Tanneries, where raw animal hides were processed into leather using a combination of urine, animal brains, and tannin from tree bark, were deliberately placed downwind from residential areas because the stench was unbearable even by ancient standards. Folonike had their own sharp ammonia smell. Fish markets reeked of salt brine and drying catch. And throughout every neighborhood, the slow rot of organic waste collecting in gutters that were cleaned sporadically, if at all. Yet people adapted. The human nose adjusts to constant smells within minutes. Residents of ancient Jerusalem probably didn't walk around gagging every day. They were acclimated. The smell was the background texture of life, invisible to them the same way the hum of traffic is invisible to someone who lives beside a freeway. But to a time traveler arriving from 2026, the first breath would hit like a wall, and you would never ever forget it. Before you conclude that the ancient world was nothing but a cesspool, something needs to be said. These people tried. They tried remarkably hard, and some of what they built still works today. The Romans constructed aqueducts that carried millions of gallons of fresh water into their cities daily. The Aqua Claudia, completed in 52 AD, stretched 43 miles from its mountain source to Rome. That's longer than a marathon course, just to move water. The total daily water supply to Imperial Rome has been estimated at roughly 200 million gallons, which works out to about 200 gallons per person per day. Modern New York City uses about 120 gallons per person daily. Rome's per capita water supply was more generous than that of one of the largest cities in the modern world. The Cloaca Maxima, Rome's great sewer, was originally built around the 6th century BC and expanded continuously for centuries afterward. It still carries water through Rome today, more than 2,600 years after its original construction. There is no modern infrastructure project that has lasted anything close to that long. Jewish purity laws, whatever their spiritual purpose, had genuine public health consequences that nobody at the time could have articulated in scientific terms. The requirement to bury human waste outside the settlement, codified in Deuteronomy, physically separated communities from their own fecal contamination. This is something European cities would fail to do consistently until the 1800s, nearly 2 millennia later. Ritual hand-washing before meals, though motivated by spiritual concerns, had obvious hygienic value. The mikveh system, even with all its limitations, meant that the Jewish population of the 1st century bathed more frequently and more thoroughly than many of their contemporaries across the ancient world. Full-body immersion in water, even imperfect water, removes a meaningful amount of dirt, parasites, and surface bacteria from the skin. These were not ignorant people. They were sharp, resourceful, and pragmatic. They observed that certain practices correlated with better outcomes even when they couldn't explain the mechanism. They built infrastructure that civilization wouldn't match again for more than 1,000 years after Rome fell. They just couldn't see bacteria. And that single blind spot, that one invisible piece of the puzzle, meant that even their most ambitious efforts sometimes made things worse instead of better. This is the part that changes how you see the ancient world. In 30 AD, every surface you touch is contaminated with organisms you can't see and nobody on Earth knows exist. The water from the village well contains bacteria that will give you diarrhea lasting weeks, and no one can explain why. The food you eat, if it's not thoroughly cooked, might harbor parasites that will take up permanent residence in your intestines. The cut on your hand from a workshop tool could become infected within days and kill you within a week. And none of it is your fault. The knowledge to prevent it simply doesn't exist yet. The germ theory of disease won't be proposed for another 18 centuries. Louis Pasteur's groundbreaking experiments happen in the 1860s. Joseph Lister introduces antiseptic surgery in the 1870s. For 1,800 years after the events we're discussing, the most brilliant physicians in the world will still attribute disease to imbalanced humors, bad air, and divine displeasure. So you live your life. You eat with unwashed hands from a communal bowl. You share a sponge on a stick at the latrine with your neighbors. You bathe in water that dozens of other people used before you. You wear clothes cleaned in fermented urine. You brush your teeth with crushed bone and an occasional rinse of aged urine imported from Spain. You sleep on a straw mat in a room shared with your entire family. And when you get sick, a physician rebalances your humors by cutting open a vein and draining your blood into a clay bowl. This was the world of the fishermen on the Sea of Galilee, the carpenters in Nazareth, the tax collectors in Capernaum, the shepherds outside Bethlehem, the women drawing water from the well before dawn, the children playing in the narrow streets. Every single person in the gospel accounts lived in this world, breathed this air, drank this water, and faced these invisible dangers every day of their lives. When the ancient texts describe someone touching a leper, that physical contact took place in a world where touching almost anything carried risk no one could see. When they describe washing another person's feet, those feet were genuinely, profoundly, almost unimaginably dirty from walking unpaved roads in open sandals through animal waste and human sewage all day long. The world of 30 AD was a world of staggering ambition and devastating limitation. A civilization that could move 200 million gallons of water a day across 43 miles of countryside, but couldn't explain why the water at the end sometimes made people sick. A culture that built bathhouses spanning 20 football fields, but filled them with water that spread the very diseases they were supposed to prevent. And maybe that's the most human thing about any of it. People doing the absolute best they could with what they knew, and living and dying with the consequences of what they didn't. Next week, we're stepping inside the actual homes of first-century Judea, what the furniture looked like, how they cooked without a kitchen, what they ate for breakfast, and why the average family home would fit inside your living room. If you've watched this far, you already know this channel doesn't skim the surface. Subscribe so you don't miss it.